Boker Tov, gentlemen, we're here on Daf Kuf Yud Daled Amid Beis, and we got up to Tanoihi. So let's see if we can find Tanoihi. You'll see the Rashbam on the left side. If you take a straight beeline across from where it says Rashbam on Kuf Yud Daled Amid Beis, you'll see one line below that, it'll say Tanoihi. And the first word in the line here on Kuf Yud Daled Amid Beis is achilas. Okay then? So let me know if you have the place and we'll get started. Yeah? Jeff? So I can't tell you if Jeff has the place, but Tanoihi. So again, you see the Rashbam, you'll draw a straight line from the Rashbam, one line below that, and you'll see achilas pras at the beginning of the line. You have that? If you don't have that, we're going to get ourselves messed up here. We'll just show it to you in this, and then you'll find it in that. Here it'll say Rashbam, straight line, and it'll say Tanoi. You see? Every Gemara is a little bit different, but okay then. Jeff, you with us? Tanoihi, it's straight across from the Rashbam. Okay, great. So now we're studying the issue of kavana in mitzvos. Namely, does kavana serve as an absolute critical requirement? It's indispensable. That's called mitzvah strichas kavana. Or do we say no? The ma'isa mitzvah, the action of the mitzvah, is enough to generate the mitzvah, to be mekayim the mitzvah. Kavana is an embellishment of the mitzvah. It's only lechatchila. And the Gemara is claiming that issue is really a machlokas tanoim with regard to chazeres, with regard to Morah on Pesach. Tisanya, we learned in a brisa, Reb Yossi Omer, again, we're talking about that very strange situation that's described in our Mishnah because he has no yerek, no vegetable available for him for the first tibul. He only has one vegetable. Which vegetable does he have? Chazeres. And Rabbi Yossi says, Afal pisha tibel b'chazeres, mitzvah. Mitzvah means chova. It's an obligation. Lahavi lefanav chazeres v'charoses. We need a second tibul. In this case, chazeres becharoses. And ushnei tavshilin, which again we'll get into as a separate topic. I don't want to get off the main discussion here. So what is Rabbi Yossi saying? Rabbi Yossi is telling us that in a case where he only had chazeres, he nevertheless needs a second tibul in chazeres. And the question is, why wasn't he yotzi with the first tibul? And the only possible answer could be because mitzvah strichas kavana. And he didn't have kavana with the first tibul. He wanted to delay his chazeres, his marah, until the second tibul. And the reason for that is because it says in the pasuk al matzah sumrom yachlu. So he wants to wait till after the matzah. And now we're holding, according to Rabbi Yossi, that mitzvah strichas kavana. Now, the chachamim they don't commit themselves officially here in this price, so they're not even mentioned. But the Gemara is working with the assumption that whenever a brisa quotes a certain name and attaches a view to that name, by mentioning his name, the implication is that the Chachamim in general did not accept it. Otherwise, we didn't have to mention his name. We could have just said it's stama. Stama means without any name as an anonymous brisa. The fact that the brisa specifies that it was Rabbi Yossi indicates that the Chachamim would say, you know what? You had chazeres for the first tibul, you were yotzi a mitzvah of chazeres, and there's no need to bring another chazeres. And that's based on the principle called mitzvahs ein tzrichas kavana. Even though you didn't have kavana for the purpose of the mitzvah of matzah, that wasn't your intent of Morah, that wasn't your intention. Nevertheless, you already fulfilled your obligation with the ma'isa achila of eating chazeres. Now, before we go on, and the Gemara is going to reject this, let's just say a few words about Shnei Tavshilin. Shnei Tavshilin are two cooked foods that are brought out, and we're going to see that through those two Tavshilin, we're going to have a zecher. We're going to have a device that brings us to remember other dimensions of Leila Pesach. Okay, then? So that's going to be Shnei Tavshilin. We'll get to that. But in any event, we see clearly, let's go over it one more time, that Rabbi Yossi maintains that he did not fulfill his mitzvah of Mara with the first Marar, and the reason for that is because mitzvah strichas kavana, and he did not have kavana for the mitzvah of Mara. And now, the Gemara is going to ask the following kasha. Vakati mimai. I don't think we can really commit Rabbi Yossi to the position that mitzvah strichas kavana. Maybe, in fact, mitzvahs ain't strichas kavana. And if you're saying mitzvahs ain't strichas kavana, you're always going to ask the question, why bring out chazeres on the second round when he fulfilled his mitzvah chazeres on the first? Dilma kasar Rabbi Yossi, mitzvahs ain't strichas kavana. And now you'll ask me, why do we require trei tibuli, a second tibul in chazeres? It seems totally superfluous and unnecessary. Our goal is twofold. Number one, to fulfill the mitzvah of Mara, which he did already with the first tibul, because mitzvahs ain't strichas kavana. And now we have a second purpose here, and that is shnei tibulim. Why do we want shnei tibulim? That's the mitzvah of Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim. And the Torah says, V'gadato lebincha, ki yishalcha bincha lemar, when your son asks you the question. But sometimes children are not curious. We have to somehow do something strange. Maybe we should stand on our head and juggle, bowling pins. I don't know what we should juggle, and get the children to ask questions. Why are we doing this? But we wanted them to ask questions based on a shini in achila, and the shini in achila, the change in achila, is a pattern of two tibulim. One tibul before the meal, and one tibul after the matzah integrated into the meal. So the second tibul has nothing to do with the mitzvah of Marar. He already fulfilled the mitzvah of Marar in this particular case with the first tibul, because mitzvahs ain't strichas kavana. You have no right to commit, Rabbi Yossi argues the Gemara, to the position that mitzvah is strichas kavana, and then you'll ask me, well, if mitzvah is strichas kavana, now I understand why he needs the second tibul, because he didn't have kavana with the first tibul, l'shem Marar. The answer is no. Mitzvahs ain't strichas kavana. And again, this is a principle that has tremendous repercussions for all Ramach mitzvahs. And that is, you don't need kavana. Kavana is not critical. He was actually yotze with the first tibul. He had chazeres, that's all he had. All right, he fulfilled the mitzvah of Mara. So why you bring out a second Mara? You fulfilled the mitzvah of Mara. The answer is, hekera l'tinokos. Now, wait a second. Let's look carefully at the language of Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi says, Afal pisha tibel b'chazeres. He already did the tibel on the first round with chazeres. Nevertheless, mitzvah. I can't overemphasize that word mitzvah. Lahavi lefanav chazeres. He needs a second Mara. As what? As hekera l'tinokos? Give it a break. That's not called a mitzvah. Hekera l'tinokos is a nice, what we call an eitzah tova, a good recommendation. You want to get the child to ask a question, do a second tibul. And he's going to say, Tati, why are you doing two tibulim? But that's not a mitzvah. A mitzvah means mitzvah bechazeres. And in fact, from the perspective of she'el tinokos, of hekera, we didn't have to bring out chazeres. He already fulfilled the mitzvah chazeres with the first tibul, because we're holding now mitzvahs ain't strichas kavana. So let him bring out another vegetable, a parsley, I don't know, bring out carrots and do a tibul with carrots. No, it says in Rabbi Yossi, mitzvah. What does it say here? Mitzvah lahavi lefanav chazeres. My mitzvah, says the Gemara. You know what it means by mitzvah? It means that he has not fulfilled his mitzvah of chazeres. And therefore, despite the fact that he did the first tibul with chazeres, he's a mitzvah to bring chazeres. Why? It can only be a mitzvah of achilas mara. So that means he wasn't yotzi his mitzvah mara with the first tibul. Why not? You're holding mitzvah saying strichas kavana. the answer must be that Rabbi Yossi holds mitzvos tzrichos kavana. Okay, then. Now we're going to talk about Shnei Tavshilin. The Gemara asks, "My Shnei Tavshilin." Well, what is this business here about bringing out to the table two cooked foods? First of all, what are those two cooked foods, and what's the purpose of bringing them out on the table? And then you can ask another question: do you have to eat them, or it's enough just to put it on the kara on the table? Amar Rav Huna, Silka v'aroza. Okay, aroza, I can tell you what aroza is because that's really a Hebrew word, but you add an aleph to make it into Aramaic, and that's orez, correct? Now let's assume, which is a gigantic assumption on my part, that orez is what we call today rice. I doubt it. But anyway, officially, we'll just get away with it. You can take a look in your English translation and see if he says rice. He says rice. By the way, Beinenu, that's wrong. But let's not, I don't want to fight with Art Scroll or any of those greats, but I don't think orez at the time of the Gemara was rice. But in any event, what's silka? Silka, he says, is tered. Now, what exactly is tered? Tered is a beet, B-E-E-T. Correct? What does he say? Oh, this time, Baruch Hashem, you got it right. Okay. So we're bringing out a beet and something called orez, which we're not sure exactly what that is right now. And here we have an interesting comment of the Rashbam. If you take a look at the Rashbam, where he says, and also, by the way, what we're going to see in the Rashbam in this rare occasion is also in Tosfos, Dibra Maskil Silka. You see that Tosfos? Silka. So the Rashbam is 4 lines down in the wide lines. 1, 2, 3, 4. Tardin, okay, Silka is tered. Verabusahi. Who could tell me? I'm going to test you here. A quiz. You don't get grades. But anyway, what does the Rashbam mean by the word rabusa? Anybody?
Some kind of meat?
No. The word rabusa, John, can you help me out here? What does rabusa mean?
Fish, isn't it?
What do you say?
It's a chiddush.
Correct, exactly. Beautiful. A chidush. Rabusahi. It means you have to add one word to the text of the Gemara, even if he has these two vegetables, or one is a vegetable, one is a grain, we'll call it, that's enough. Now, as soon as you say Rabusa, it means that there was a case that was simple, that was pshita, and that's what the Rashbam is going to explain. What case is pshita? Kolshke, now much more so, it goes without saying, Shnei mini bas. If he took out to the table 2 types of meat. Now, what does that mean, Shnei mini bas? I don't know. For example, oaf. Would chicken suffice? Or do we need roast beef and what do they call that? The flanken. They have a fancy name for it here in Israel. Asada, real asada. Excellent. Take a look at the Rashi. At Tosfos, for kolshkein shnei mine bas. Now, this sounds like a pretty logical assumption.
Would it include chicken when it says basar?
I don't know. Chicken, I don't know.
Chicken,
that's going to be a tremendous issue here about chicken, whether chicken is called basar. But before we get to that, I just want to say the following, that eating basar at the Seder table, let's leave out chicken again, basar, asado, pot roast, whatever your favorite steak meat is, flanken.
There's a difference if you have steak when it's roasted.
Okay, and what's the problem if you roast it? Anybody remember? Why don't we eat roast meat at the night of the Seder?
It shouldn't be confused with the Korban Pesach.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Chef. 2 points for your team. We don't want to confuse it with Korban Pesach. because someone might come to the conclusion, imagine, it's a wild conclusion, that we're allowed to eat kodshim bachutz. Chutz means outside of Yerushalayim. Now, Basar Pesach has the din of Shlomim. It could be eaten anywhere within the city limits of Yerushalayim. But the problem is, I'm not sure that our Yerushalayim is the Yerushalayim for Achilas Kodshim. Which kind of Yerushalayim would qualify for Achilas Kodshim? It's got to be when the Beis HaMikdash stands. Why? Because the Kedusha of Yerushalayim is an extension of one central Kedusha. Kedusha actually expands like a hub that expands to the entire wheel. What is that hub from which Kedushas Yerushalayim emanates? It is the Beis HaMikdash. So now a person eats basar, and somebody thinks, hey, you know what? He's eating the Korban Pesach. Especially, as Joe points out, if it's roasted. Because the Korban Pesach has to be eaten roasted. Sli. If you cook the meat of a Korban Pesach, which is called bashel, or there's something called shliko, which is overcooked, then there's something called na. Na means it's undercooked. Any of the above, it's a lav d'oraisa, a violation of a lav. Maybe you even get malchus if you eat it. But he's eating roasted meat. So we should avoid meat on the night of Pesach. Let's not get involved. Is it roasted? Is it this meat? Is it that meat? So the Rashbam and Tosfos are giving us a big chidush here. The Rashbam says, it goes without saying, pshita, with a kolshkein, that meat is more chashuv. Meat has a greater chashivas than beets. I mean, again, I like beets. It's good for my digestive system. But let's call a spade, call a beet. You want to be on the beet. No, that's a different spell. Anyway, a beet is not so significant. Meat, wow. That's what we want to do. We want to put meat on our Pesach table. Now we're going to see later on in Sugyas later that on the night of the Seder, we bring out our best kelim, our best tablecloths, and all the best Kiddush cups and everything the best. So we should bring out meat. So the Rashbam and Tosfos say, let's bring out meat. But we have to keep in mind that the Rashbam and Tosfos are saying something that intuitively we might have objected and saying, let's not bring out meat to the table on Leil HaPesach because it's nireh k'achilas kodshim b'chutz. And this you'll see in a footnote here in the name of the Rashash, if you want to take a look in your spare time. Okay. Now, let me ask you a question. A man is eating meat on the night of Pesach. Why would anyone in their right mind think that he's eating the Korban Pesach? But the answer is that these tafshilin are zecher leKorban Pesach, and also zecher lechagiga. So if these tafshilin are zecher leKorban Pesach, and now he brings out meat as one of the two tafshilin, or in fact both tafshilin are meat, then if it's zecher leKorban Pesach, we need just one little skip and a hop to draw the conclusion that he's eating meat of the Korban Pesach, because the entire purpose of the tafshilin is zecher leKorban Pesach. And Rava Omar, Rava Avi Mahader Asikla Varos. Now, the word Mahader means that he really tried very hard and he sweated it out in order to find these two tafshilin, Silka and Arosa. Why? Any Shnei tafshilin should do it. And here we have what I call a hashkafic or agadic statement in the Gemara. And what is that? Hol v'nafik mipume de Rav Huna. Rav Huna, the great Rav Huna, he was the Rosh Shiva, the Gadol Hador in his time, and all the other Amoraim saw themselves as Talmidim of Rav Huna. Rav Huna gave an example. He could have just said any Shnei Tavshilin. He give him a list of cooked foods, and he would have chosen arbitrarily from that list. But you know what? Since Rav Huna said that you don't need meat for the Shnei Tavshilin, even though meat would be a greater zecher for 2 karbanos, the Korban Pesach and the Chagiga, you don't need meat. Okay, so what do you need? Tavshilin. Any Tavshilin should do, but Rav Huna wanted to give us 2 examples of Tavshilin. Once Rav Huna said these 2 examples, we want to use those 2 examples. This is what we call the Mesoras HaTorah. And all over Shas, the Gemara emphasizes Mesoras HaTorah. We do it exactly the way it was given to us by our elders, by the previous generation. We want to link up one generation with the previous generation. As the Pasuk says, Veheshiv leiv avos al banim. There should be an unbroken chain. So to link back to Rav Huna, we're going to actually take it as Seder, Silka and Arosa, and remind ourselves that these were the examples that Rav Huna gave, even though Rav Huna could have given a million different other examples. And I want to give you an example, if I can, of this concept of Mesoras HaTorah. You know, Reb Chaim Brisker had a Talmud by the name of Rab Baruch Ber. His last name was Leibovich. And Rab Baruch Ber was a fanatical disciple of his Rebbe Reb Chaim. What do I mean by fanatical? He tried so hard when he passed on the Torah of Reb Chaim to say it exactly the way Reb Chaim said it. Again, the critics said that he didn't succeed, that he didn't really say it over exactly the way Reb Chaim said it, because, you know, Reb Baruch Ber had a mind of his own, a very deep mind. But the story is told that at one point in his capacity as the Rosh Hashiva of Kamenetz, he had an issue. There was an issue that was raised, and there were 2 extreme views on that issue. Some say it was absolutely unacceptable, and some say, no, this is the way we have to do it. And the other one would say, no, we can't accept it. We can't do it that way. And Reb Baruch Ber said, I got to ask my Rebbe. So he came to Reb Chaim to ask him what he should do. And Reb Chaim quoted a pasuk in Koheles. And the great wise Shlomo Melech said the following: Al titzdak harbe, val tirsha harbe. Which means don't be so super pious and don't be so evil on the other side. But when Reb Chaim said it over, and he quoted this pasuk to Reb Baruch Ber, he put his finger in front of Reb Baruch Ber's eyes, and he said the following: Al titzdak harbe, val tirsha harbe. And then he brought his finger right back into the middle. And Reb Baruch Ber understood from the way that Reb Chaim moved his finger that Reb Chaim was telling him, was instructing him to look for the middle of the road. Don't go to this extreme, don't go to that extreme, but find what we call the Shvil HaZahav, the golden mean. And whenever Reb Baruch Ber would say this over, he would always move his finger exactly the way Reb Chaim moved his finger. And that's a connection in the Mesorah to an earlier generation. And I want to tell you that this morning, after living in a certain neighborhood, I don't want to mention it publicly, for the last 6 months, finally someone came over to me. It was like really uplifting. Again, if it was up to me, I would create a society for Shalom Aleichem. You know, Chazal say that to say Shalom Aleichem to a person, you give him an identity. Okay, anyway, whatever it is. So why did this man come over to me today? He wanted to sell me, he's doing a whole campaign, to order tcheles for tzitzis. He saw that I wasn't too excited, I don't wear tcheles, and he starts showing me in the Chumash how important tcheles is. So I told him, my Rebbe didn't wear tcheles. So he starts arguing with me. He starts saying, well, maybe they didn't have tchelis at that time. I said, no, they had tchelis. The same tchelis that you're buying. My friend Greenspan, the dentist, his tchelis, that's a tchelis that Rav Soloveitchik knew about. But Rav Soloveitchik was convinced that it's not enough to prove that X is tchelis. You have to have a misnora. You have to have generations and generations in an unbroken link to identify tchelis. It's not enough to figure out scientifically what is tchelis. Anyway, they're just telling you a story that happened just a few hours ago in my local neighborhood. Okay. Omer of Ashi. Shmami Mon Mida Rav Huna. Right? Let's understand why Orez, well, we'll translate it loosely as rice, is a candidate for Shnei Tavshilin. Shmami no Mida Rav Huna. Less the Chayish Lahader of Yochanan ben Nuri. Okay, now here we get into a major issue, which has tremendous repercussions. Let me ask you the following question. Can you make matzah out of rice? So you'll tell me no, right? Because there are only 5 species of grains, chameshes mine dogon, and rice would be number 6, but we only have 5. And today, by the way, I don't have to tell you this, we have rice noodles and, rice breads. They make all sorts of things out of rice. So what's the status of rice? Says Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, one of the Tanoim, that there are 6 species of grains, not 5, but 6. And what that means is that if you add water to rice and it ferments, according to Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, it's chametz. And if on the other hand you arrest it before it ferments, or how did they say it in English? Leavens, is there such a word? Before it leavens? I don't know if I'm using the word properly. My wife always claims I make up new words, so I don't know. This might be another example of that. In any event, it becomes matzah. So rice, according to Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, like wheat, barley, and rye and so forth, has the status of either chametz or matzah. What bracha would you make on rice bread, according to Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri? Hamotzi lechem in aretz. It can't be considered a tavshil. The Sanya we learned in the Brisa. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri Omer, Orez min daganhu. It's a 6th category of dagan. We have to figure out why Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri came to that conclusion. And v'chayav al chimutza kares, the adam yotze bo yedei chovaso the Pesach. In other words, it's either chametz or it's matzah. Matzah is always the flip side of chametz. That which, if you allowed it to leaven, it would become chametz. If you arrest the process prematurely, it is called matzah, and you could fulfill your mitzvah of matzah. And we might add, you can make hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Either way, whether it ferments or it doesn't, whether it's chametz or matzah, it doesn't matter. It's lechem, and that's because Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri classifies orez as a 6th category of dagan. Now, can you imagine making a tavshil of orez? That would be like, for us, we don't accept Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, if we took wheat, kernels of wheat, and we cooked them in water and made a tavshil out of it. What would be the status of such a tavshil? Hello, anybody home? Joe, can you help me here? Again, you took one of the 5 species of grains. Leave out rice for a moment.
Chametz.
It would be chametz. Could you imagine taking chametz out to your table? According to Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, orez is chametz. Again, if let's say you left it for 18 minutes, whatever the shear is, we're not going into that now. It's chametz. It's like taking one of the grains and making farina out of it. Okay, I'm dating myself. You probably never heard of farina. Anyway, you made hot cereal from them. It would be chametz. How could Rav Huna say that we take orez and make a tavshil out of orez And with that cooked rice, we're going to bring it out to the table, Zecher LePesach.
But isn't it only chametz if you cook it improperly? The same with
No, I'd say
farina or
18 minutes,
oatmeal? But oatmeal isn't chametz, right?
If you put water into
No,
oatmeal,
oatmeal is not chametz. If you
no, but I'm saying if you
cook
cook it.
well, if you cook it, you
Right.
can make it chametz, but
Right.
it's not chametz. Flour.
Right. So we're talking about a
Rice is
tafshil of oretz. We're talking about, according to Rav Huna, take rice, cook it means with water, and put it out on the Seder table. What are you talking about? According to Rav Yochanan Nuri, you'd be violating the Isser of Chametz. The answer is that Rav Huna rejects Rav Yochanan Nuri, and according to his opinion, rice could never become chametz, it could never become matzah, it could never be considered lechem. It's not one of the 5 species of grain. Okay. Chizkiya Omar, afilu dag ubeitza she'olav. Chizkiya says you don't need 2 tafshilim, 2 different cooked, I'll call it vegetables or whatever it might be. Could be meat, could be vegetables. No, you don't need that. You could actually make an omelet. Do you follow what I mean by an omelet? Right, an omelet means you take eggs and cheese, but you don't want to put milchiks on your Seder table. So instead, what you do is you take fish and you cook it with eggs. Now, do we have such a thing in our society? Fish that's cooked with eggs? We probably do. I just don't know what they're called. And he says that what you do is when you let's say pulverize or, you grind down, an egg together with a fish, a piece of fish, then you have shnei tafshilim. Assuming the egg was cooked, assuming the fish was cooked, you could take a raw fish together with a raw egg, cook them together, and Chizkiya says that's enough for shnei tafshilim. In other words, according to Chizkiya, it's not a matter of the Masechet Bishul that we need 2 different Masechet Bishul in order to create Shnei Tavshilim. 1 Masechet Bishul would be sufficient to create Shnei Tavshilim if there are 2 Tavshilim that are being cooked simultaneously in one mixture. A big Chiddush of Chizkiya. I would have said if not for Chizkiya, and this is probably the sheet of Rav Huna, you need 1 tafshil that's made out of selet, and you need another tafshil that's made out of orez, or whatever 2 tafshil you like. But each one is a separate tafshil. Each one was cooked on its own. There were 2 Masechet Bishul. No. We don't care about the Masechet Bishul. We look at the chefza. If the chefza that you cooked has 2 different elements in it, 2 different ingredients, each one is cooked. Now, again, if you put salt on a piece of fish or on an egg and you cook the salt, that's not a tafshil. You wouldn't cook, salt could be added as a flavoring, but it's not a tafshil. But if you take an egg and you cook it together with a piece of fish, that's considered shnei tafshil. Now, what I would like to, so to speak, investigate or raise an objection to Chizkiya. Again, I don't want Chizkiya to get angry at me, but if I was a Talmud in Chizkiya's class and he raised this point, I would have raised my hand and I would have said, Rebbe, I don't understand. What does this look like? Does this look like 2 tafshilim? Maybe Chizkiya would have answered that you could see the egg in the fish. I don't know. Is that true? Can you actually see? Is the egg noticeable? Usually, again, I'm not a chef or anything, but usually when you cook something in an egg, the egg gets absorbed in that fish, meat, or potatoes, whatever you're cooking in an egg. I don't know if there's a heker and you could see 2 tafshilim. So I'm not sure what Chizkiya would answer to me. Either you would say, yeah, you're right. We have to make sure that the egg sort of solidifies and creates this kind of a covering. Or maybe Chizkiya would say, I couldn't care less. I don't have to show off to anybody, any spectator, and say, look, here we have 2 tafshil. And I don't need a hekel. I know that I cooked this fish in an egg. And therefore that makes it shnei tafshil.
Well, when we bring out the 2 tafshilim originally before this, wasn't it supposed to be 2 separate dishes?
Hil Chizkiah. That's pre-Chizkiah. Chizkiah came along with the revolution, and he said, you know what? You don't need 2 separate dishes. 1 dish is enough. But what I don't understand about Chizkiah, when you say 1 dish is enough, is it obvious, it is apparent to the naked eye that really there are 2 different tafshilim that were cooked together here? Or is it enough that you know for a fact that there were 2 tafshilim? I don't know. Rav Yosef Omar, Sarech Shnei Mini Bas. Whoa. Comes along Rav Yosef and he goes to the other extreme. He's not willing to accept neither Rav Huna nor Chizkiah. Both agree that a tafshil could be a vegetable, it could be an egg, it could be fish, anything that's cooked. And now comes along Rav Yosef, and he says we need meat. Imagine, we mentioned earlier that meat is a bit of a problem because somebody might come along and say you're eating meat. Maybe that meat is a Korban Pesach. And Rav Yosef is totally oblivious to this. And he says the following. Echad, 1 piece of meat will be Zeichel Korban Pesach. The Echad Zeichel Korban Chagiga. Right, on the 14th of Nisan, they would shech a Korban Chagiga together with the Korban Pesach, and they would eat the 2 meats on the night of Pesach on the 15th of Nisan, Leil Tesvav. Now, I'd like to take a look at the Rashbam. The Rashbam says the following. Afilu dagu beitza sha'olav, sha'yregilim latiach es hadag bebeitzin. Right, they would take the fish and they would dip it into egg. In other words, I guess you call it the yellow part of the egg, the scrambled liquid egg. V'hainu rabusa, and that's a chiddush. Afal gav de dummy litav shalechad. I think the word dummy here means that it looks like, to the spectator, 1 tafshil. The echad zeichel chagigas arbasar haba im hapesach. Okay, so let me ask you the following question. When you read this Rashbam, do you get the impression that there's any difference between these 2 pieces of meat in the way they prepared, the way they cooked? He doesn't say it, does he? He says, Echad zeichel chagigas arbasar haba pesach. He doesn't differentiate between the 2. However, take a look at the next Rashbam. Shnei mini basar. This is Rav Yosef, the 3rd opinion. Tzli keneged ha-Pesach, umevushal keneged ha-Chagiga. Kain pirish Rabbeinu Chananel miromi.
2 separate things.
And what's the difference between the 2 pieces of meat? One was roasted, excellent, and the other one was cooked. Oh, we're getting really, really close to a Korban Pesach over here. In other words, Rashbam in the name of Rabbeinu Chananel is claiming that if 1 piece of meat is Zeichel at Pesach, what condition do we have to add to that piece of meat? Can it be cooked? Not allowed to eat a cooked piece of meat for the Korban Pesach. We have to eat tzli. And the Rashbam therefore requires, again in the name of Rabbeinu Chananel miromi, that this piece of meat is roasted. Wow, we're getting really, really like to the edge, You know what I mean by the edge? You get too close to the edge, you could fall over. And it looks like you're eating from the Korban Pesach.
Why, I don't understand something. I never understood this, okay? Why would you think that you're reading from the Korban Pesach? Everybody knows we do so many things, l'zecher. There's there's so many things that we do,
Pesach.
especially the Seder.
Pesach has a different status. I'll tell you why. Because there's a halacha called makrivim afal pishein bayis.
Okay.
Now, I don't want to get into the whole thing. You heard of the Shomronim. They actually bring a korban pesach. Yeah, I haven't been there in like probably 50 years. Are they still deaf mutes? Yeah.
No, they still do it.
Yeah. When I visited the Shomronim, I think it was in Shechem at the time. Yeah, they were, all of them were deaf. Anyway.
But the Shomronim, they do a lot of things that we don't
Correct.
follow.
But
I don't,
the halach of makrivin afal pishein bayis, although it might not apply to other korbanos, it does apply to a korban pesach.
I mean, there are people who do Korban Pesach, Erev Pesach here in Yerushalayim also.
Oh, this I don't know. And they're not Shomronim?
Okay, I don't know if they still do it, but afterwards I can tell you that they used to do it. But
They used to do it. All right, look, I don't know.
The thing is that what we do, it's something with Zecher. Even then, everybody couldn't have had something from the Korban Pesach.
No, but I'm saying
Today.
that it could be, again, don't quote me on this because I'll deny I said it, but it could be that you could bring a Korban Pesach today, even without the Beis Hamikdash.
Right, okay.
And that makes Korban Pesach unique. The halachas of Korban Pesach are different than those of other kodesh. For that, we'd have to learn Masechet Pesachim. But one thing for sure, Korban Pesach has to be tzli. And now we're drawing a very sharp line between Zecher and the real thing. Could be that somebody would be eating the real thing. The problem with Korban Pesach today is, where are you allowed to eat it? So the man is outside the boundaries of Yerushalayim. Let's say he's in Modi'in, where my son lives, or he's in Kariel, my other son. There it's for sure Chutz Yerushalayim. I don't know about I don't want to get into that, but that's a whole issue, All right. So if you take a look at Tosfos, right, it's let's say 4 lines down from the wide lines. He says 1, 2, 3, 4. Pirush Rabbeinu Chananel, Tzli, the meat has to be roasted, Zeicha lePesach. Umevushal, but the other piece of meat is cooked, Zeicha leChagig. V'lo nehira. Now, Tosfos is about to reject Rabbeinu Chananel. And I was hoping that maybe he would reject Rabbeinu Chananel on my grounds, for the same reason that I was very uncomfortable with Rabbeinu Chananel, that it's, you're getting too close to the edge over here, and it looks like you're eating kodshim bachutz. But Tosfos has a whole different objection to Rabbeinu Chananel. Now, the Korban Pesach has to be eaten tzli. And that's a halach that's unique and singular to Korban Pesach. Does not apply to other kodesh. What about Chagiga? Chagiga is not a Korban Pesach. And therefore Chagiga should not require tzli. And that's exactly what Rabbeinu Chananel is telling us. That although one piece of meat has to be tzli because it's Zeichel Pesach, the other piece of meat is Zeichel Chagiga. That's not a Pesach. That falls under the general category of all kodshim, which are not tzli, but rather mavushal. So you want to set up a distinction between one piece of meat and the other, one Zeichel Pesach and the other Zeichel Chagiga, then you want that other piece of meat to be mavushal and not tzli. Because otherwise, you haven't contrasted the Zeichel Chagig with the Zeichel Pesach. But again, this is all based on one premise, and that is that the Chagig has a status of Shar Kodshim. Shar Kodshim means all Kodshim other than Pesach. And if Chagiga has the status of Shar Kodshim, how do we eat the Chagiga? Mevushal. And therefore, Rabbeinu Chananel insists that the second Tavshil must be Mevushal Zecher LeChagiga. However, Rabbeinu Chananel is oblivious, so to speak. He's deliberately ignoring the Shita of one of the Tanoim, Ben Tema. Ben Tema, in Masechet Pesachim, is of the opinion that the entire purpose of the Chagiga on Erev Pesach is to accompany the Korban Pesach. There's no separate, independent mitzvah of Chagiga. The mitzvah of Chagiga is part and parcel of the mitzvah of Pesach. And therefore, Ben Tema insists that like the Korban Pesach, the Chagiga has to be eaten tzli. And that's why Tosfos is upset with Rabbeinu Chananel. Says Tosfos, V'lo nehira, I don't like this, Rabbeinu Chananel. To kaimalon ki Ben Tema. We paskin like Ben Tema. Earlier in Masechet Pesachim. T'yein chagiga nechelas elo tzli. Now, I can't argue against Tosfos that according to Ben Tema, Chagiga has to be eaten tzli. It's an accompaniment to the Korban Pesach, and it has to be eaten in the same way that you eat the basa of the Korban Pesach. But how does Tosfos know that we're asking like Ben Tema? And he says, "De masnisin asya kavase." You see those three words in Tosfos? Mm-hmm. Now, what do those three words mean? So we're going to have a Mishnah later on Daf Kuf Tet Zayin. Let's see if we can find this. The Mishnah says, this is the famous Mishnah of the Manishtana, and it says, Halayla hazeh kulo tzli. You remember that from the Manishtana? No, you don't remember. Why? Because we drop it. Today, we substitute, the Mesubim instead of Halayla hazeh kulo tzli. What does that mean, kulo tzli? What does the word kulo mean?
It's the only kind of meat that we eat?
The only kind of meat that we eat is tzli. This is at the time of the Beis HaMikdash. What are you talking about? We eat the Korban Chagiga on the night of the Pesach. That's not tzli. Take a look at Tosfos, the Maskal Kulo tzli. Rav Chizda Mukile Elu Dvarim Kiben Tema. Di Omar Chagiga Aboim HaPesach Einen Echeles El Tzli. So when the Mishnah says Kulo tzli, Alayla Zeh Kulo tzli, it's reflecting the sheet of whom? Of Ben Tema. Ben Tema holds that the Chagiga is eaten what? Tzli. Says Tosfos, we now have a Stam Mishnah, Aliba de Ben Tema. And we always paskin like a Stam Mishnah. And therefore we see clearly that we're going to paskin that Chagiga requires Tzli. And that's antithetical to Rabbeinu Chananel, because Rabbeinu Chananel says that one of the two tavshilin of basar, according to Rav Yosef, has to be mevushal in order to strike up a zecher lechagiga. Well, that's a big mistake. We pass like Ben Tema. It's a stam mishnah like Ben Tema that the chagiga hanecheles im Pesach requires tzli. Lekach nire ditravayu mivushol. V'chein mashma loshen tavshilu. Whoa. This is where I get lost, Rabbi Yosef. Tosfos led us like you lead a horse to the water, and we're meant to drink the water. Tosfos led us to the conclusion that these two tavshilin, one is zeichel Pesach that has to be eaten tzli, The other is Zeichel Chagiga Hanechelis of a Pesach that has to be in Tzli like Ben Tema. And therefore, the two Tafshilin should be what? Should be Tzli. Whoa. Says Tosfos, no. The two Tafshilin should be Mevusholim. Why Mevusholim? Now, in the back of my Gemara, we have something called the Ure HaTosfos. I don't think you have it in your Gemara, but this is the Masifta, the Ure HaTosfos. So what can I tell you? He adds 6 words here. Am I happy with these 6 words? Do I understand what he's saying? He says, Afal gav de Pesach Chagiga travayu tzluyim hem. Both the Pesach and the Chagiga were roasted, liben tema. Ein tzorech litzlosam. We don't have to roast them. Why? Here are the 6 words that I don't understand. Di ein boim chova el zecher bial. We're not bringing the Korban Pesach. We're not bringing the Chagiga. There's no chova. We don't have the Beis Hamikdash. It's only a zecher, and if it's only a zecher, then you might as well bring it out tavshilin cooked. Why? I don't know. I wish I could tell you what's going on here. I don't know. We'll have to stop here, and I'm going to try to see if we can come up with some sort of explanation. I just want to, before I leave you, look in the back in the Yalkut HaBiurim just to see if he touches on this. I don't believe we're going to find anything here, but just to say that I did my legwork here. Shnei mevusholim. Okay, all right, this is where we'll stop.
Thank you.
Maybe by tomorrow we'll be smarter.
Yeah.
Okay.